Thank you, everyone. I'd like to start this September 15th, 2020 meeting of the Santa Barbara Ordinance Committee. I'd like to call it to order now. Ms. Clerk, may I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon.
Here.
Chair Gutierrez.
Present.
Thank you.
Let the minutes reflect we are all present. Ms. Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are not.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments on matters not on the agenda?
At this time, we do not.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, I'd like to ask for the staff report, please.
I'm going to read
sorry.
it.
Clerk,
Okay.
if you could read the first agenda item.
Okay. So subject is mobile home park overlay zone. Recommendation that ordinance committee review and recommend to the city council adoption of the proposed amendments to the Santa Barbara Municipal Code, creating chapter 30.57 mobile home park overlay zone and amending the zoning map to add the mobile home park overlay zone.
Thank you. And now I'd like to ask for the staff report, please.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. Yes, I will be giving the staff report today, and we can start on the next slide, please. So the purpose of our hearing today is to review the new mobile home park overlay zone and to get a recommendation from the Ordinance Committee to forward to the City Council. To give you some background on why we have this direction in front of you today, I'm going to take you back to the original creation of the average unit size density incentive program. So that was adopted in 2013, and the program covered all areas that were currently zoned for multi-unit housing, and that included mobile home parks. As you're all well aware, we have done many different reviews of the AUD program and adapted it based on various scenarios and how it was interacting with making the general plan policies come to fruition. One of those reviews was in 2018, where the City Council directed us to look at protecting the mobile home parks that exist in our city from redevelopment to multi-unit housing under the AUD program. So the action here before you today is really looking at the final protection for mobile home parks in our city. We have also done an additional protection before this in 2019, where we stripped the AUD incentives for parking from the mobile home parks. At that point in time, City Council gave us direction to take it one step further. And so that is what is here before you today. Next slide, please. So there are many different related general plan policies that we are following to do this direction to protect the mobile home parks. The first two shown on your screen here today are really looking at protecting low-income housing throughout our city, both for special needs as well as moderate to low-income seniors. We've found in canvassing these parks and talking with the public based on the notifications that we did back when we took the parking incentive away from them, as well as this process, that many of these parks are housing for seniors. Next slide, please. Additionally, we also have general plan policies related to non-subsidized rental housing. So this is rental housing that is low income, but not part of our housing program and not covenant restricted. Mobile home parks also fall into this. So we're looking at really continuing to follow these general plan policies to preserve this existing non-subsidized rental housing. Next slide, please. And so in our city, we have 7 mobile home parks, and the first grouping here is shown on your screen. These 5 mobile home parks fall between 101 and Cacique Street. And then the next slide will show you the second or the last two mobile home parks. If we can go to the next slide. So we have one above State on Hope Avenue, and then another on De La Vina Street past Alomar. So that comprises the 7 parks that will be part of the overlay zone if adopted. Next slide, please. So in these parks themselves, they represent 333 units of housing for our city and are all currently multi-unit residential housing in zone, except for the one on Hope Street above State, which is single family. In the process of creating this overlay zone, we did notify all of the property owners, all of the park owners and operators, according to the Housing and Community Development Department state level, who really has control over most things that happen in mobile home parks across the state. We also notified the interested parties list for the AUD program because it had started in that program, as well as speaking with the residents of the mobile home parks, received many other emails of other residents to notify as well. So we have provided all of that notification of this process of the Planning Commission meeting, and will continue to notify them of the next steps. Next slide, please. So the definition of an overlay zone is really something that applies over an existing zoning designation that establishes stricter standards in that area. So this overlay will limit the allowed uses in those mobile home parks on the maps just shown to strictly mobile home parks, permanent recreational vehicles, and accessory uses. And to do this, we amend our sectional zoning maps in our code to create an overlay zone as shown on those previous maps. Next slide, please. So we took this to the Planning Commission on August 6th of this year, and they recommended approval of the overlay with no changes to staff's recommendation. Next slide. And so we're here today before the Ordinance Committee to ask you to consider the proposed mobile home overlay zone and the associated zoning map amendments, and provide a recommendation to City Council for adoption. And with that, that concludes my presentation on this project. And I'm happy to answer any questions that any of the Ordinance Committee members may have on this item. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. All right, I see my colleagues. Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. So just a quick question. Thank you, Ms. Metzger. So I know something we've talked about, and it was mentioned in the staff report too, is having some form of vacancy decontrol coupled with this ordinance. And I'm wondering if that's something that if we had the will to do that, would that be part of this amendment, or would that need to come back, or just a question on how that fits in with what's happening with what's before us today?
Chair Gutierrez, I'll let Mr. Colon answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Colon.
Thank you, Ms. Metzger. Chair Gutierrez, Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, obviously it's outside the scope of discussion for today, but if the Ordinance Committee would like to make a recommendation that the council look at vacancy control along with this, you could initiate that discussion with the council at this time. And just by way of background for people who may be watching, the council actually asked me to report back in March on vacancy control for mobile home parks. And I reported that the County of Santa Barbara limits rent increases to 10% between tenants in order to try and protect the value of the in-place mobile home.
Thank you. That answers my question at this point. And maybe when we're in discussion, I can pick that back up. Thank you.
Chair Gutierrez and Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, also to add to that, although it wasn't included in the motion by the Planning Commission, there was a lot of discussion from the members on that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon. Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Colon, if I could ask you another question about that. Do mobile home rentals fall under the bills that escaped me, but the January 2000 legislation that limited rent increase on residential tenants, the 5% plus CPI kind of thing?
No, generally mobile homes are subject to the city's rent control ordinance, which has, I don't recall the caps immediately, but which grant a base increase and offer the opportunity for discretionary increases if need be. However, AB 3088 that was signed and went into effect August 31st does extend some of the COVID-19 anti-eviction provisions to mobile home parks.
Okay. And then can you remind me, what does a situation that vacancy control responds to look like? So what I've heard is somebody's moving out or somebody dies, is that there's actually speculators who come in and swoop up a spot, and that's when the whole thing starts to go south in terms of rent increases. What is the common or usual occurrence that vacancy control addresses? How does that all work out?
Let's go on.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. Councilmember Jordan, I can't say it's common or frequent, but I can explain what the residents of the parks are concerned about. When they go to sell their home, they find that the mobile homes are, of course, very difficult to move. So they're left in a situation where the structure has some value, but the value of their mobile home is very dependent on the monthly rental charge. So imagine you were paying $1,000 a month for a space rental and your home was worth $80,000. If the owner of the park has the opportunity to raise the rent from $1,000 to $2,000, that has a direct impact on the value of your home in place. So the experience of some park residents is that by virtue of their ability to increase rent without restriction, that is vacancy decontrol, park owners have made it impossible or virtually impossible to sell units in place. And the effect of that is that the owners are then able to buy those units at what the coach owners believe to be submarket prices. Where this all gets challenging is that going back to the city's rent control ordinance in the late 80s, mobile home rent control ordinance in the late 80s, it's a zero-sum game. And in effect, whatever the council does is shifting value between the owner of the park and the owner of the coach.
Got it. And then I'm not sure if this question is for you or back to staff. This covers whatever the 6 or 7 specific parcels that we know about today. Is there any chance in heck that a new mobile home park will be developed given the current constraints or benefits? And would we be right, if that happened, would we be right back in this process, or is there a way to craft the ordinance that it also would automatically become a overlay zone on any new mobile home parcel also?
Ms. Metzer?
Yes, Chair Gutierrez and Councilmember Jordan. So the hypothetical of that question, I would say the highest and best use of any other multi-unit housing zone would not be a mobile home park in our city, just from what we've seen through the development of other multi-unit housings through the AUD program. If that is a concern of yours, though, we could add language to the ordinance to cover that.
And so I think what you're kind of telling me is it's a dying dinosaur that we're trying to prolong, and the chances are pretty low, right?
That is correct.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Ms. Metzer, the only thing I have is, if you can clarify, I believe you said at one point that the mobile home park near Hope was excluded because it was single family. Did I hear that correctly?
Chair Gutierrez, no, it's not excluded. It's just the only one that's single family zoned. All of the others are multifamily zoned. So that is included.
Oh, okay, so it'll be protected by this as well.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That was the only thing I had to ask. Ms. Clerk, are there any public speakers for this item?
We do not have any public speakers for this item.
Okay. Seeing how there's no public speakers, I'd like to open it back up to my colleagues to discuss further and possibly make a motion. Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. So this has been a long time coming. Very excited to see it before us, and came with full council recommendation and happy to see it. I'm happy to make the motion to move this on to council with the proposed mobile home overlay zone ordinance and zoning map amendments. And I would also like to make a try at including in that motion a recommendation to council to consider vacancy control on mobile home park units.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Jordan?
I'd be happy to thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to second that on both of those. This is a long time coming, too long coming, and happy to see it happening. It's a valuable housing stock that is unique in its demographic of who lives there and needs to be protected. I guess my question for on both components of that motion would be to Mr. Colon again. Can we safely send this forward to be worked on and then have you directed to come back to talk about vacancy control, to have it amended at a future date? Is that the path you see that is the best path to take?
Mr. Colon?
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. Councilmember Jordan, I'm hearing a recommendation to move the proposed mobile home overlay ordinance onto council, and a recommendation that council give us direction to draft a vacancy control amendment.
Well, here's my concern. I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but I don't want the adoption of this particular ordinance to be held up for 6 months or a year, waiting for it to become better with a vacancy control provision. So what I'm really asking you is it making the presumption that we rule the world, the three of us, and that it's going to be acceptable to council? Is that the best path forward, given that concern, to move it to council, hope that that gains approval for putting it in place now, and then as quickly as possible, you would come back and amend the ordinance to whatever form of vacancy control that would be agreeable?
Mr. Colon?
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. Yes, Councilmember Jordan, I'm sorry, I was very unclear. We're talking about two separate ordinances.
Okay.
So
Okay, then good enough. So I'm seconding the motion and happy with both of those components of the motion.
Councilmember Jordan, I believe you also said that you wanted to add a wording to protect future mobile homes.
No, I'm okay. I'm pretty satisfied that staff would have a good finger on the pulse of whether one of those is ever going to be built new in this city again, and I'm comfortable with the reply.
Okay. All right. Then if Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon would like to, so was the motion, did you make a motion and was it seconded?
Yes.
Okay. Then
And it was to move the staff recommendation for the overlay and the zoning map amendments, and then with a recommendation to council to consider vacancy control to direct that coming back to ordinance.
Okay. Madam Clerk? if you can note that Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon made the motion and it was seconded by Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan, did you have something you wanted to add? Oh, okay. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Okay, so moved by Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, recommendation to council with the mobile home overlay zone ordinances. And then also recommend to council for vacancy control, amendments on vacancy control. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, and seconded by Councilmember Jordan.
correct.
Okay, I'll take a vote. Councilmember Jordan,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon,
Yes.
Chair Gutierrez.
Aye. Okay, that passes unanimously. All right. Unless there's anything else, I'd like to thank everybody and conclude this ordinance committee meeting.